Hello everybody, welcome to my first official video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how to paint super easy watercolor forests. So grab your brushes and paint and let's start painting. Okay, so the first thing that I always do is when I start any artwork on a piece of paper or in my sketchbook is I mask off a little area where I'm going to work. The reason why I mask off a space is because it leaves a nice clean white border, and I'm a bit of a neat freak, but you don't have to do it. I normally use washi tape instead of masking tape because I find that they've got a bit of a waxy layer, so they don't absorb as much water as masking tape, and they tend to pull off a lot easier on your paper versus masking tape. I'm going to divide this page in 3 areas. The first area will be my color swatches that I'll be using, and then the second area will be my tree that I'm going to be showing you how to paint, and then the third area will just be a little tutorial on how to create atmospheric depth and to create the backgrounds going forward to the foregrounds. When I finish applying the masking tape, I always just take my finger and smooth it down to make sure that there's no little places where water or paint can seep through. So I'm going to put down the colors that I'm going to be using now. They are Ultramarine, which is like a purpley bluish, it's like a light midnight blue. It's quite pretty. It's one of my favorite blues to use. And then I'm going to use some Viridian hue, which is a green that has a bit of a blue tinge to it as well. Oh, that was the wrong one. That's Viridian hue. And then I'm just going to use some Paynes gray. So Paynes gray is one of my favorite colors that I use. I like to add Paynes grey to basically everything because it gives it like this mysterious magical tinge, and it's not a black, so you don't get that charcoal effect when you add it to a color. Also, the nice thing about Paynes grey is you can use it as it is to paint skies. If you want to paint like cloudy effects, Paynes grey works perfect for it. And then when people ask me to buy palettes or which colors they should have, I always say a Van Dyke brown and a Paynes grey. So we're going to paint the tree now. The first thing that I normally start with is painting the tree stump or the center part of the tree. And then I start from the top and paint downwards. So when you do your leaves, I make little short strokes to kind of like imitate how leaves and branches would look on a branch. And then I like to paint my trees asymmetrical so that it looks more natural than a symmetrical tree. For some reason I just like the off-centerness of a branch and of the trees. So I would normally paint a branch and then paint the next branch underneath it, so that you kind of just create like this effect that there is like just some asymmetricalness. And you can always go back in and fill up the tree if you think it's too bare or you don't like the tree, if you want to make it more fuller or whatever you like. If you struggle with your shape, you can just draw a triangle and paint the leaves according to the triangle, or like a cypress, like a pine tree. You can basically just go and change it accordingly. If you also don't know how trees look, I always say go Google, study trees, find a way that you can have a visual solution to what you see and translating it to paper. And then we are going to start with the background. So just a tip, when you paint landscapes or anything that wants to show depth, whatever is closer to you will have more detail and be darker. Whatever is far away will be lighter with less detail. That's how you create your foreground, middle ground, and background. And also that's how you show depth. So for me, I normally start by mixing the color for my background and then just diluting it quite a lot with water. so that you have a lighter color at the back. And then when you paint your, let's say, first mountain with trees, I normally like to just start with the stems again and then add the branches so that you can create the shape of your mountain. And the reason why I like painting these watercolor forests is because they're so organic and you can't go wrong with it. And if you make a oops, you can just add some water or create a suggestive splatter with your brush and it'll just form part of the ways of the mountain. And then once you've finished painting your trees, you can just take your brush and blend it out again. This is a good way to practice also your wet on wet blending techniques and just to understand what watercolor is about. Because when I teach people how to do watercolor art, I always explain to them that it's called watercolor art for a reason, because you need to put quite a lot of water with this medium to create that puddling and bleeding effects that makes watercolors so iconic and magical. Watercolor art is art by accident to me because it's so organic and intuitive that you have control, but you don't have control. And once it's dry, you only fully get to see what the effect was that you created. So I am just basically putting down some more trees and then pulling it down and blending it in. If you find that your trees might be too dark to your liking, you can always just dabble some water on top of it, blend it out and lift it with your brush. So if your watercolor brush is dried and you lift it up, you can remove quite a lot of pigment, and that just gives it also a different type of feel. And then I just like to blend my paint downwards so that I can already create a more softer gradient. And there we go. So we've now done our first layer of watercolor paint. So then all that you do is you take your hairdryer or heat gun and you dry your layer, because if watercolor paint is dry, it should be water resistant so that when you work on top of it, your paint won't bleed and your next layer will be more defined and you won't have like a puddling mess. And then try to not put your brush at an angle, because then you tend to put your heat gun or dry at an angle, because then you tend to move the paint and you get patterns that you might not have wanted. So the next color, I'll be just adding some more paint, same type of pigment. I'm just adding some more blue, some more green, and then lastly just adding my black. This next layer of paint, it's not going to be as light as the next one. So we wanted to have like a definite definition that sounds funny, from the first background layer to the next one. And then you can just go and paint your trees again and then bleed it down. Like I said, this is a very good exercise if you are starting with watercolor paint, because you learn quite a lot about the paint itself. And watercolor paint for me is a very fun medium, and a lot of people don't like watercolor paint because they say they have no control over it. But once you get to know your paints and you get to know the medium, you will understand how super amazing and awesome these paints are. They are just really fun to do and really fun to experiment with, and just one of my absolute favorite mediums. So I'm just going to be painting some more little trees and some small little strokes just to indicate that there's some foresty things happening there. And then just taking my brush and slightly going over it, ensuring that there's no definite detail that can define this layer. The snoring at the back is my Pekingese. She's lying and sleeping and snoring a bit, so don't mind her. And it's garden day, so the gardener is mowing the lawn and doing all the gardening things. So I'm sorry for all the background noise, but this is the only time I have to record my voice over for this video. Again, I'm just blow drying this next layer, and then I'm going to paint another layer, but making it even more darker So now we basically have 2 layers of mountains and trees. So with the next one, I'm just adding some Paynes grey, just so that it has a bit more of a more detail for me. And we'll also just go in and blend this one out. When you paint your backgrounds, it doesn't matter if your trees don't have like super a lot of detail, because again, you don't want it to have detail, otherwise the whole picture is going to, I don't know where to focus, I don't know where to focus. Whereby having subtle detail, it allows your eyes to decide where it wants to focus, whether it is in the depth that you are creating or whether it is in your foreground that you've done with your trees. So I would say don't overpaint the back too much. This whole little painting took me about 5 minutes. So this is also really fast and fun. You shouldn't go and overpaint and overcomplicate it. It should just be fun and free and intuitive and just be fun. That's the only thing. Yeah, so that is me just continuing painting. And then let me just tell you why I started painting these watercolor forests. If you know me, I really like painting flowers and leaves and stuff like that. And then we went on holiday to Heinetzberg, which is like in Limpopo, I think. And the whole area is just covered in kilometers of forests of pine trees. And I've never been a nature girl, but going to this place was so beautiful and good for my soul that I literally fell in love with trees and with the idea of perspective depth, that it blew my mind. So I've been painting watercolor forests for I think the past week now, since we got back. And I just want to go stay there. It's like this fairy tale kingdom, and you feel so close to God's creation because of this beautiful, epic scenery. We went zip lining in Maguba's Kloof, which is so pretty because it's just green and rivers, and it's just absolutely wonderfully beautiful. And so for me, this is now let's just get back to painting before I get carried away. This is now the second last layer, so as you can see, I've already added a lot more detail to it, so that you've got that idea, okay, this is a bit more closer to me than the background colors are. And then lastly, we're just going to dry this one, and then lastly we'll just add our front paints, our front layer of pine trees, and then we are done. So once I've finished painting the trees and stuff, I normally just like to go in and add a little description of what I did in my sketchbook. For instance, like watercolor forests, I add the names of the colors to the paints, and then I just go in and write which palette I've used, because I have a lot of palettes and sometimes the colors do tend to differ across the different manufacturers of paint. And then if I have some extra notes, I make some notes, because this is in my sketchbook and it's so that I can learn and just play around. And then what I also did was I did this in my Moleskine watercolor sketchpad. I think it has like a 200 or 300 GSM paper, which is really nice because you can paint and do quite a lot of it on your sketchpad. I really enjoyed painting these little forests, and I hope that you learned something new. So I've also added a time lapse of the painting that I did on the opposite page of this entry, so that you can see how I would actually do this if I want to paint something like this in my sketchbook. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you will like my page and subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram. I'll list all the social media links below in the commentary or description section, and I'll also link all the materials that I used in this tutorial. I hope to paint with you again, and then have a wonderful day. Until we meet again, goodbye.